Perfect. Thanks a lot for joining this talk. Today I'm going to be talking about activation framework, or rather building an activation framework for your company. My name is Konstantin Valiotti. As you've seen already, I am currently a product director of growth at PandaDoc, where I am leading product managers to deliver growth of our user base and revenue. I've also been consulting a few B2C and B2B startups in the past and as currently. So the agenda for today's call, for today's presentation, is basically there are 4 points. The one that we are going to start with is role of activation. Then we will try to identify primary activation metric, and then we'll see how to optimize the primary experience of the user so we can improve the activation metric. And then, as a last part of this talk, we're going to be talking about how to actually build an activation engine or an activation framework and move from a very simplistic understanding of activation. So for any PLG company, activation is one of the key funnel steps. Activation is a moment when new user extracts the core value of your product for the first time. If you read about activation, that it's also called sometimes as an aha moment. And essentially, we want to deliver that moment as early as possible in the user's experience. As for activation examples, so there is a Slack with 2,000 messages sent within the team, and then Slack considers this account or user to be activated. So essentially, it probably aligns with either retention or monetization metric. For us at PandaDoc, we have an activation metric defined as created a document from a template, which essentially for document automation seems to be a metric to judge that the user has gotten some value from the solution. And I will show you a little bit later how we arrived at this metric. And for Twitter, it's about following 30 users, because after this, the users probably get enough of the information in their feed to actually stay with the Twitter for longer. The main idea behind why activation is important is that essentially on the graph, you see retention just for the all users and for a cohort of users that has been activated. And essentially, each new acquired user is actually can be activated. But if the user is not activated, how are you going to retain someone who hasn't gotten a value for the first time in your solution? You can't. So with that in mind, we are going to move into trying to understand how do we actually identify this metric for your specific company in your specific case. So I would suggest that there are 3 main steps to follow here. First, you need to consider the what, second, the why, and then you will need to synthesize both the quantitative perspective and the qualitative perspective. And we are going to use data analysis and user interviews to build the data or the foundation for us to understand what the activation metric is for our solution. We'll start with the quantitative side with data analysis. So the point here is to find main predictors of the target action through data analysis. And for many companies, depending on their stage or their business model, the target actions could be different. So for example, for B2B SaaS, typically we'll be looking at monetization metrics such as upgrade to trial or the first purchase. While for other companies, you're going to be looking at retention on day X, week X, or month X, depending on your solution specifically. And at this step, we need to find what predicts in the early experience that this action or this target action will actually happen for the user. In order to do that, I suggest we can use 3 different approaches. The first one is based on Venn diagrams, and essentially it identifies overlap of target action with other actions, with other behavior points in your application or solution. The second one is information value and weight of evidence approach. So it will allow you to assess the predictive power of certain actions as related to your target action, meaning retention or monetization once again. And the third point here would be feature importance of random forest model. So it's kind of similar to the results that you'll get from correlation analysis, probably. It's a simple ML model, and it can be easily used if you have a product analyst on the team to assess what are the actions that users do in your application that lead them to convert or to be retained. Here, I'm not going to go over each specific method because I think it can be covered by other presentations or by some other articles on the web. I will share this presentation after this call, and in there will be additional slides that you could go through to understand those quantitative methodologies a little bit better. So for now, I'm just going to skip them. And then just to recap, we've identified how we can work through data analysis to understand what predicts the target action, conversion, or retention. And then there is a second perspective to be considered, the qualitative one, right? So the user research part. Here, we would like to understand what experience has led users to actually understand the value of the product and made them able to make a decision whether they want to stay with your solution, whether they want to buy it or not. Here, we would need to talk to people who have completed the target action, specifically in the last 2-3 weeks, just so it stays fresh in their mind. We need someone who fits your ideal customer profile, because if you're going to be talking to the people who do not fit that definition, you may get the wrong results and you may try to activate the wrong audience. And of course, if you're B2B SaaS, you'll need to be talking to the primary decision maker and selecting a solution if that happens to be a user, because for B2B, there could be differences for buyers and for users. In case they align, it should be a decision maker, like an admin, for example. From the user's research perspective, what we are looking for are 3 main categories. So the first one is the moment of truth. What made them realize that the product is right? So how did they explore it? The second part is the user journey. So what were their first steps? What did they try in your solution? How they involved other people, if at all, and what did they do first to learn more about how it works? And the third part is basically the decision criteria. So each person, when selecting a solution, goes through a selection process. And it implies that users have specific, either implicit or explicit decision criteria for choosing a solution. And ideally, you would like to understand what those were. So how did they compare solutions? And what made your solution stand out? Who else did they consider, and for what reasons? Given all of this information, the quantitative and the qualitative side, what you're going to be able to do is to actually synthesize this data into one cohesive whole, right? So you will be able to build a user journey based on this data, and you will be able to map each quantitative data point to a qualitative perspective of a user, where they started, what kind of actions they have done, and then from quantitative side, you'll be able to map it to very specific actions that are done on this step, and then you are going to be able to look whether those actions are predictive of the user becoming retained or converted. Essentially, for us at PandaDoc, we've identified that within the user journey, and of course on this slide, it's not a complete user journey, a lot of steps are omitted, but essentially at some point the user arrives at the experience of templates and the ability to create a document from a template. So it's kind of saving time for them, and they realize like how much better their life is going to be if they're going to use that functionality, and they will not have to do routine tasks anymore. And there is a cluster of events that relates to that experience. And from qualitative side, we've also understood that the users felt like really happy about that functionality. They felt that it was worth exploring, and that it was their aha moment. And then we realized, okay, that's it. That's our aha moment. That's our activation metric that we are going to be working on. So let's say that we have identified primary activation metric for you or for your company. Then essentially we need to work on improving that, right? So here I suggest that there are 3 main categories of activation issues. First, the users might not know about something, about how it works. So essentially they are lost. The second part is they can't do something for one reason or another. It may be too hard, or they might not want to do something because they don't realize the value, for example, or feel that this is too much of a time investment to be doing right from the start. So starting with the don't know category, and this list is not exhaustive, of course. I've just mapped some of the issues to some of the solutions, and of course there is just more than that. But starting with don't know, the first thing you could do is to align with top of the funnel. You can essentially create a PLG website that creates expectations for the major action. So here's an example of Typeform who does just that on their main page. And in your ads, you can also mention the product and how it works. Another point within the don't know category is the education part. So tooltips, educational videos, embedded help content in your solution will help the users navigate around the problems, or can help them navigate to a specific path or a happy path right away. And you can see that on an example of a Notion. Then the second category was can do. So here, the first thing that we would like to do is to remove friction, right? So for example, Airtable makes you go through an onboarding where you are selecting specific things, and then Airtable just creates a table for you. So you can just remove steps from first experience, or as Airtable done, you can connect sign up with that experience, right? Because you do a few actions, and hey, you have already your first table done at Airtable. Or you can simply improve core user experience if that is not something that you've been investing for a long time. Second here is prioritizing actions. So essentially on the screen, you see Calendly with the checklist, and those actions are very simple. The user can go through them real fast, and all of them happen to show what is the value of Calendly and how it works. So checklists, blocking non-essential elements in UI. If there is like a reporting part of your app and it has no data, maybe you just want to block it from the usage and just tell users to go to another part of your solution. And of course, you can work with empty states improvement. Even here at the Calendly, you would see that after sign up, you would still have this interview like 30 minutes already set up, even though you haven't done any actions. For providing human touch in this category, so for PandaDoc, for example, we allow our users to engage with the human, depending on the context, the segment, and the part of the app where it's done. Those could be different people like sales or support people or customer success. But essentially, sometimes you need to provide users with things that don't scale, and those could be sales and customer success. And of course, you can add entry points to book a demo, so they can go through through the experience with the human. It's not really scalable, but for certain segments, that's okay to do. And then the last category of activation issues don't want to. So the first and the first solution here would be pre-built assets. And on the screenshot, you see how Miro takes care of the account activation through templates. And essentially, if you're coming to Miro for the first time, it may be a little bit overwhelming with all of the elements or all of the actions that are possible, but templates unlock specific value right away, and you just can go drawing without any pauses or any cognitive effort on your side. So essentially, templates, welcome content suggestions work really well within that category. And the last one about the don't want to category is pre-generated experience. On the screenshot, you can see Pipedrive. It asks you whether you would like to generate sample data, and then you can go through their CRM and learn about solution without trying to set up it fully as if you were using it. Instead, you could just see it's an example of a fictional company that uses that. So sample content, guided tours with predefined assets to specific use cases could be really helpful for your users. And then, of course, the last part. So by the time we know what activation is, how to identify an activation metric for your product and your company, and how to work on optimizing that experience. So how do we move from simplistic activation to the holistic onboarding and start to take into account just more than just one metric, right? So we need first to understand that activation is just one dimension of onboarding. So at some point, the user becomes retained, engaged, paid, whatever, and then the user does all of the actions that are helpful for him or for them or for their business. So starting at the sign up and finishing somewhere at an arbitrary point, which is to be defined later on, users go through specific actions. It could be set up, it could be inviting team members for collaboration tools, it can be setting up integrations, lots of different things. And activation is just one part of that. And of course, it's important to work on that. But at some point, you will not be able to improve your activation anymore with the big results. So you'll need to consider bigger perspective, the onboarding itself. And moving from like just the definition of one single metric of activation to the whole of onboarding requires you to go through a continuous reassessment of your onboarding. It's just going to happen like on a quarterly or half a year basis. And you're going to go through 3 steps. The first one is you need to segment your user base. It's especially important for the complex solutions with multiple offerings or multiple funnels. Then you're going to identify supporting behaviors that also help people become retained or converted. And then you're going to be improving those supporting behaviors to like feature work. As for segmenting new user base, this is step number one. Essentially, you need to find a segmentation that clearly delineates different segments. It could be done by intent, by primary usage, by decision criteria, or by some other segmentation metric. However, the way you segment your audience should change user goals, onboarding needs of those users, and how they are trying to use your solution. As soon as you're done with the segmentation, you're going to identify supporting metrics for those segments. Especially for complex solutions, you may have different activation metrics. So while it could be just one thing for a sales team that is using your product, if you're like B2B SaaS that caters to that audience, HR team might find a little bit different value, even though the feature set is the same. So you'll need to see whether the main activation metric holds for those different segments. The second part would be additional engagement and conversion drivers. So for example, that could be some kind of collaboration experience. So inviting team members might be really important for your solution if you're a B2B SaaS. Now, maybe it's about setting up additional features, integrating with another tool or something like that. But those things could be very important to show to the user right up front after doing the activation, so they can see even more value within this onboarding period. And the third part, which is often forgotten until a storm hits, is experience and performance measurements. So are users happy with the experience you provide? It can be a leading indicator of whether they're going to stay with your solution. Is it fast enough? And you can generally check whether the speed of your solution impacts conversion or retention by slowing down your application. So there's like a worsening experiment, but essentially it might require some work from you. Having identified supporting behaviors and metrics, what you could do is to just iterate quarterly or each half a year on a new strategic theme. So from the discovery perspective, in one quarter, you're going to be like working or focusing on just one single solution or just one single segment, or whatever the work is sliced. You don't need to discover too many things, right? And from delivery perspective, you still have the backlog from the previous quarter. So you are just executing on that, getting improvements and just getting learnings. And next quarter, your eyes are going to be staying with the same metric because you see that there are a lot of potential to improve it, or you may want to get involved with another metric that you haven't identified previously, as we've discussed on the previous slide. Having done that, this is like the last thought that I have in my presentation. If you don't work on activation, this is how the user journey will look like for your user. Because it starts in the sign up. Well, it's even going to start before the sign up, right? Because there is an awareness stage and everything like that. But the user will have to go through those hoops and loops, and will try to find the way towards conversion. If you work on just primary activation metric, then the user will realize the value of your solution, but there is still going to be so many different things that they need to do in order to reach the conversion or a retention point. And if you're going to be working on an activation framework, if you're going to iterate on activation, if you're going to consider the holistic perspective, the overall onboarding, and not just one primary metric, one primary framework, then you're going to actually achieve much more. And from the user journey perspective, it's going to be much more straightforward for the user how to get the value and how to actually start using this for and adopt the solution as a whole. So that's it. That's my presentation. Thanks a lot. If you'd like, you'll see this presentation right after the conference commences. And there will be more slides for you to go through, the ones that were hidden. So thanks a lot. That's it from my side. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, I hope we have some questions here.
I will stop sharing the screen so we just could talk.
Right. So I'll check the chat. So I was interested in your segmentation. How have you found it working in terms of how you end up segmenting in your particular case?
So in our case, the first things that we've done is teams-based segmentation, because we realized that we are getting a lot of different a lot of different teams, meaning departments like sales, HR, legal coming to us. And we've looked through internal data that we get from the enrichment solution Clearbit to understand whether they are behaving differently, whether they look different, and how many different teams do we get. And essentially, it looks like we're getting a lot of different teams, and we have a lot of different ways that they perform, meaning they have different metrics for conversion. Some of those teams stay longer, some of those teams expand better. And we understand that at some points within the early experience, we are not doing a very good job of showing our solution to some of the teams, because it might be a little bit unnatural for them to go through the first experience that we have. So we are, trying to iterate and to provide more direct path towards understanding the value of our solution for those teams.
Right. Okay. And so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that you're not doing individuals per se. You're really looking at the group together as a different type of group and use case, if you will.
Yeah. You are right. So teams are aligned to use cases. They're still onboarding and activating individuals, right? Because there is just an individual behind the screen that signs up for our solution, and he or she represents, let's say, a sales team, right? So we are treating sales team as an umbrella of certain use cases and certain needs, right? Because each team would have different ways that they're going to use our tool. And essentially, we are trying to personalize that experience for them so they could understand, yes, this is something that is built for me as a sales manager, let's say.
Right. And do you also, like, within that team, do you identify like power users and people that just don't know how to spell PandaDoc and
no,
try
I would
to
say
adjust for that?
So I would rather say that we are getting a lot of different people signing up, and we just segment them by their intent, or like team is an intent, right? To an extent. Right. So that's a proxy of an intent for us and the proxy for the use case. So we are trying to work with those teams differently. We're not trying to adjust our solution for, let's say, different levels of computer literacy at the moment. But we are trying to simplify the experience for everyone. This is something that is always done by like core teams. How do we make our solution better and more easily understood by everyone? Because essentially we are getting a lot of different audiences. Some of them who don't work with computer mostly, and some of them are from tech companies. So of course, this is a consideration, but this is something that we try to do regardless of the activation perspective.
Yeah, right. Okay, awesome. I think we have a question here.
Yeah. So what sample size have you found is adequate for user interviews? That's a great question. So typically, the major recommendation is to go through 10 to 15 and then look whether you're getting patterns. If you do, then you can stop. And if you don't have patterns, then either there is something wrong about what you're researching or the way you've established your research questions, or simply there is no pattern, or you've selected too broad of a segment, right? So for us, it was enough to interview around 15 users, because at this point, we have stopped getting any new input, any new information that we could use for defining the activation metric.
Good answer. Okay. Any other questions? You can unmute and just ask away. We've got a couple more minutes, so if you have a question, we can answer it here. We're still on time, amazingly. And how long have you been at PandaDoc?
So I'm at PandaDoc for 1.5 years right now. I've been working on acquisition, activation, and our freemium funnel as well. And I have a team of PMs who are driving the execution strategy for like parts of those experiences.
Wow. Okay, that sounds exciting.
It is.